President Trump appears unlikely to accept Iran's latest proposal to end the war. Tehran's offer includes reopening the Strait of Hormuz while requiring the U.S. to lift its naval blockade of Iranian ports and setting aside questions about the country's nuclear program for later negotiations. The New York Times cites multiple people briefed on discussions in the White House Situation Room yesterday who say the president has told advisors he is not satisfied with that proposal. The paper goes on to report it is not clear precisely why Trump is skeptical of the offer, but he has repeatedly insisted that Iran cannot have nuclear weapons. That is a sentiment Secretary of State Marco Rubio echoed in an interview yesterday on Fox News.
Do you believe the Iranians are serious about making a deal?
I think the Iranians are serious about getting themselves out of the mess that they're in. So, yeah, I think they're serious about figuring out how can they buy themselves more time. We can't let them get away with it. They're very good negotiators. They're very experienced negotiators. And we have to ensure that any deal that is made, any agreement that is made, is one that definitively prevents them from sprinting towards a nuclear weapon at any point.
Yeah, I mean, if you're not opening the straits, John Lemire, and you're not taking care of the nuclear program, I mean, Donald Trump, based on past statements, has about as much of a chance of accepting that deal as, I don't know, Alex Cora has in throwing John Henry his next surprise birthday party. Just had to get that in. That's not going to happen. And I've got to say, too, you know, project forward. Let's say the president takes a bad deal. Let's say that they end up reopening the straits where Iran has a better deal, actually, than they had before, which they're going to have regardless. They just are. They're going to take this opportunity to actually be in better economic shape after this war than before this war that was supposed to topple the regime. It seems to me the one thing that conservatives cannot stand for, the one thing, you know, that would drive me crazy as an observer of how Iran and the United States have negotiated with each other since 1979, would be a nuclear Iran. You just can't have, you can't have Donald Trump in the same position or in a worse position than Barack Obama was in when they negotiated for years in painstaking detail, sending over the best experts across the government, hammering out a deal, which I will say I was against. A lot of people were for, including David Ignatius. So I think most people on the show would say, we'll go with Ignatius and not Joe on this one. But still, they hammered out a deal that Donald Trump and a lot of conservatives completely slammed. So are you really going to put yourself at the end of this war in a position where you're in at least as bad a position as Barack Obama and Joe Biden and the other 7 presidents since 1979 having to negotiate the future of Iran's nuclear program? I mean, no. They've said there cannot be a nuclear Iran. So how do they get out of this with a nuclear Iran with their program, even if they lie and say, oh, well, you know, give us 20 years? How do they do that and this not be seen as a total abject failure on the Trump administration's part? I think Marco was right.
Yeah, well, I'll first note, Sox have won 3 in a row somehow. But you're right that this is a real dilemma. And there are some loud voices suggesting that President Trump should think about endorsing the idea of splitting these two things, make the Strait of Hormuz separate from nuclear negotiations. Senator Blumenthal on our air yesterday did that. Richard Haas, who has been one step ahead on a lot of the negotiations there in Iran, he also thinks there'd be some wisdom in splitting this, do the Strait now, come back to the nuke program. The president, though, does not seem interested. And I think it's to your point, Joe. You know, it is already, let's be clear, inherently a defeat for the United States that Iran is going to come out of this war with more control over the Strait of Hormuz, whether that means fully in control or some sort of authority that's established or a tolling mechanism. It's almost inherent at this point that Tehran's going to have more of a say over this vital waterway than they did at the start of this conflict at the end of February. That's already an L for the Trump team. They can't take another one. So therefore, they need to save face and accomplish that goal, which you just laid out, preventing Tehran from ever achieving any kind of nuclear program. So that's why I think President Trump is going to take a harder line here, because he knows the Strait of Hormuz in some ways is already gone. at least to a degree, and that now he needs to be tougher here to get that sort of win. The issue is Tehran willing to negotiate? When? How? And if not, will President Trump have to eventually pull down the ceasefire? He's been very reluctant to do that to this point. He's extended it a number of times. I've been told by aides he really doesn't want to resume the fighting, but if he doesn't have any other cards to play, he may just have to in order to pressure Iran to a deal.
You know, but the question is, what does the fighting get you? I mean, they've destroyed so many military targets now, and with every military target that they destroy, do they pick up any political gains from that? I keep going back to what one of the foremost experts at the CIA over the past generation told me early on when he heard that they were, taking out 60% of this, 70% of that, 80% of that. This was 3 weeks ago, maybe a month ago. This expert said to me, he goes, it sounds a lot like those Vietnam body counts. Doesn't really matter at the end of the day because we won every battle in Vietnam. We won every battle in Iraq. We won every battle in Afghanistan, and we still lost the wars. So, David Drucker, it seems to me, again, when you don't just look at what this administration's saying, what Marco's saying, Secretary of State, I've known him a very long time, what Pete Hegseth has been saying, Secretary of Defense, I haven't known him for a very long time. We didn't hang out in the same bars together. If you listen to what the administration's been saying, if you listen to what conservatives have been saying, like me for a generation, if you listen to what even Democrats have been saying, there can be no nuclear Iran, then it seems to me everything else is just ground noise. If the president gets out of this war and Iran still has a nuclear program, I find it hard to believe that everybody wouldn't consider that a massive loss. So maybe that's why the Secretary of Defense and maybe that's why Secretary of State are saying the things that they're saying, even while others around them are saying, well, maybe we can get a deal that allow Iran to do this, that, or that. Just open up the strait first.
Yeah, look, I think I'd pay attention in particular, too, to the Secretary of State's remarks, because I think he understands the stakes here, and he's the one person in the administration that is able to communicate the administration's broader goals, usually anyway, in a way that doesn't make it look like they're headed toward accepting a situation that is less than things were before the war. I mean, just, Joe, we've been talking about this here. Think about how the discussion about Iran has transitioned from 2015 to 2026. Republicans were up in arms, and I think rightly so, about what turned out to be the JCPOA, the Iran deal that Obama negotiated with Iran, because it never dealt with Iran's proxy groups, their malign actions in the Middle East. It never permanently shut down their nuclear weapons capabilities and development. It simply delayed and put them out into the future when they could be, hopefully dealt with by somebody else at a later date, and didn't deal with Iran's terrorism, right? They're the world's largest state sponsor of terrorism. We've now moved from that debate to, is it allowing them nuclear weapons capabilities in the future or allowing them to control the Strait of Hormuz, something they've never controlled before? And so Iran, with a much deeper threshold for pain than we have, because they don't have voters, because they don't allow their people to vote, and they kill their own people when they protest, they are now using this new chit that they have to try and salvage the nuclear program. And the administration isn't even talking about the wielding of terror as a piece of diplomacy and military strength, which they have. And so our resounding military victory is impressive. It's not a bad thing. But Iran's conventional military was never the problem. The problem was the development of nuclear weapons, the terrorism that they spread around the globe, and particularly in the Middle East. And we're not even discussing those things. And that's one of the reasons why, at this point, the outcome of the war geopolitically is completely up in the air.
Yeah, and Willie, also one of the reasons why the president is going to have to be able to say to the American people that we've come up with a deal that reopens the strait and has finished Iran's nuclear program. Because if you talk to people in the Obama administration, and as I've said, just like David Drucker, I was opposed to that deal. We talked about it every day on the show. But if you talk to Jake Sullivan, if you talk to Wendy Sherman, if you talk to other people that negotiated this deal, it was a painstaking, long negotiation, and they will now point to examples of how that deal actually contained Iran's nuclear program. And so they will tell you it worked. And conservatives would say that is a good thing. But the criticism at the time was, what are you going to do about the conventional weapons that they keep building, that they, could fire missiles not only at all of our allies in the region, but also hit America? What are you going to do about all the proxy groups? What are you going to do about the fact that they still export terrorism? And the Obama administration, and a lot of people would say it was a deal worth taking. A lot of people would say, okay, these are two separate things. Conservatives hated that. Republicans hated that. And now that is the argument a lot of them are making, which is, let's just split these two things. We'll worry about the nuclear deal later. Now let's just open the strait. Why, that's an even worse situation, a far worse situation than what President Obama negotiated. So we would have had this war. It's costing tens and tens of billions of dollars, probably $1 billion every day. And we would be in worse shape than we were under the Obama plan.
And that's exactly what the Iranians are offering so far in these talks, if you can call them that, preliminary, which is, we'll open the strait, you end the blockade, and we'll talk about the nuclear program later. And as you say, the president, I don't feel like, can walk away from this war without some conclusion on the nuclear program. Also, we should point out, oil is really on the rise again. Closed at $108 a barrel yesterday, up to $111 this morning right now on global markets. So the Iranians have found that Strait of Hormuz is the leverage point that they don't want to give up.